if there was one change in your company that you could make to impact the business, what change would that be? Allow them to be the shacho for a day.
Welcome to the Reach New Heights podcast. I'm your host, Misa Koizumi. Today, we are going to discuss motivating factors beyond salary and recruitment processes challenges. Today, we have Curtis as our expert today, and he is a founding member and director at Apex.
Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts. It's an interesting topic, as I found that a lot of companies have built out their recruitment processes and assessment protocols, but maybe inadvertently they miss some of the motivating factors of candidates. So it's good to dive into what really motivates candidates as well.
So Curtis, you've been recruiting in Japan for 20 years now. So what's something that worked 5-10 years ago that doesn't work anymore these days?
Yeah, it's a great question, particularly because we can't ignore COVID. And that interesting timing, COVID started about 5 years ago. But let me go back, because in the period of about 2013 to, let's say, 2019, I think companies were really focused on their processes, really focused on the metrics. Recruiting companies really knew what activities we had to put in to get what results. COVID changed all of that. So if we look at how things have changed, particularly past COVID, we're going to look at probably two things in my mind. One would be how we spend our time, and then how we offer value to our clients and candidates in the recruitment process in general. We'll get more into value later on, because I know that's a little bit of a buzzword right now. But particularly time. If we think about before COVID, we were visiting clients and candidates a lot more often. We were really driving the relationship. That was great. Got to learn a lot more about the candidates' experiences, and when you go visit somebody, you really have 45 minutes to sometimes over an hour to learn about them. By doing that, we learn about their motivations and really what matters to them. However, not every outside meeting can be the best use of time. So now we have a lot more online meetings. However, online meetings are usually only 20 to 30 minutes. So while we get to cram in a lot more meetings in our day, we don't get to build the same level of relationship in the past. So that's something that good recruiters are trying to think about, the balance between meeting people face to face and really driving the relationship, and also being very cognizant of time and efficiency.
That is very true. COVID changed everything. So
That's right. Next, I think value. And again, value is going to be a little bit of a buzzword, but the way I look at value is, what can recruiters offer beyond the job description, beyond the contacting a candidate about a job, offering a resume to a client. And so that's something that most recruiting companies are really thinking about right now. How can they offer a better experience to their clients, a better experience to their candidates? How can we drive that relationship so that I'm helping the talent acquisitions team with their job? I'm making their job better. I'm helping the candidate not just with their job change experience, but also with their knowledge of the market. So that's what I would look at as recruiters need to focus on value.
Well, it's true, because there's a lot of recruitment companies out there right now. I see a lot of ads on the trains, even on like Shibuya streets and train stations everywhere. So I think it's a very competitive market right now, right?
It's very competitive, but I have been hearing for 20 years that recruitment in Japan is saturated. So I've been hearing that for a long time, and sure, with technology and with more and more people entering the market, it can be true. It just challenges us to rise above that, to think differently, and to really drive the relationships as much as we can, and not be transactional.
And let's dig deeper, break up in the company into two major types, Japanese and foreign, and compare their hiring processes. So are recruitment priorities different in Japan versus like foreign companies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's changing quite a bit. For example, traditionally, Japanese companies didn't hire much mid-career executives. That's changing quite a bit. Now we see they're hiring a lot more mid-career and executives. However, there still are some probably areas that remain to be differentiators between Japanese companies and foreign capital companies. One would be the recruitment process. Japanese companies tend to really focus on the education, the degree, the hensachi of the candidate. When they're reviewing a resume, they might go line by line looking for the keyword match, the technical match. So resume assessment for Japanese companies is really critical. And usually the first interview is the most important part of the process. On the other hand, foreign capital companies, while they still care about the caliber of companies the person's worked for, and they might look at education, they're more looking about the capabilities and fit into the role. They want to see a larger candidate pool. A lot of that could be because the global hiring teams are driving local talent acquisitions teams to just meet the market. So more candidates are going to the first interview. However, the foreign capital companies tend to have longer interview processes. Probably went from about 3 to now the average is closer to 5 or 6 in some situations. So it's a pretty hard journey for most candidates. And so they are losing talent throughout the process as well.
Right. I feel like Japanese companies are like gakurekisakai, like oriented on academic backgrounds and everything. And also like foreign companies, they're based on KPIs, so they may be asking talent acquisition people to just meet a lot of candidates as much as possible and then drive them on to next process.
That's certainly the case. Yeah.
I see. I feel like Japanese is a little bit perfectionist in the way, so that they want someone to find someone perfect at the CV screening point. And then foreign companies are a little flexible, but then takes more time.
Yeah, I think the foreign companies, they make a very difficult assessment at the final point, where the Japanese companies tend to really focus on the CV in the first interview.
Okay, so let's dig deeper into what candidate values. We have been recognizing increased compensation plays one part of why candidates consider job change. But what specific benefits or motivator besides that are gaining tractions within professionals in Japan?
Yeah. It's certainly the case that compensation matters. We can't expect candidates to change jobs for less or often even for the same amount. That's part of career development. Candidates need to see increased level of compensation. And I often challenge the companies I work with to think about themselves personally. Why would they change a job if they don't get some type of compensation increase? However, I think it's really important and probably not addressed enough that there are many other motivating factors for candidates that often go undiscussed, particularly up until the offer time, which is sometimes too late. So while companies focus a lot on assessments, I would suggest they focus a lot more on motivations during the early stages as well. A couple different things I see that are motivating factors outside of compensation. One would be the job itself and what the person's going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. How does that fit into what they can do and what they want to do? What does that look like in both the 3, 6, 9 months, but also in a 2-year period? What does the job and the trajectory look like for the company? The next, and maybe under this, would be meaningful work. Do they find their work meaningful? Is there clear objectives and goals in the work they have? Another would be the level within the company. This needs to be kind of communicated quite clearly and quite upfront in the beginning of the process. What's the level in the company? What's the ability to make decisions within the company? And then also under the job itself would be kind of the transparency for career development. Many companies have a meritocracy, but what does that mean? So how can you get promoted within the company?
Yeah.
I think another one would be the importance of the role. The impact of the role and what that impact is for their clients, for inside the company, but also into society. Another kind of usage of the word value, a candidate brought this up to me last year, and it ties into compensation. It was, I want to know my impact within the company, and I want to feel the worth of that paid into me by the compensation, right? This candidate was not looking for money for the sake of money. They were judging the impact of the role based on the compensation. This is something that we see Japan is actually lagging in quite a bit compared to the rest of the world. The kind of impact of the role is equated with the compensation level. So definitely, while I want to stay away from compensation, the impact of the role is a big motivating factor. Yeah. The final one is a big one everybody knows, and it's probably the most relevant in terms of the direct questions we get, but that would be work-life balance. Work-life balance and flexibility. So we know COVID changed all that. I certainly don't want to get into the pros and cons of work-life balance, but being able to explain what beyond work-life balance, how progressive is your company to accepting the delivery of work versus how many hours you're at your desk and how often you're present. An interesting thing I heard recently, and I think is very true, is that foreign companies and Japanese companies have kind of a different take on time and attendance. So for example, Japanese companies have time and attendance more often to monitor their employees that they don't want them to work overtime, right? They don't want them to work overtime, one, because maybe they don't want to pay the overtime, but they also want to avoid kind of the Zangyo culture, the working their employees too hard. Whereas foreign companies tend to have time and attendance policies to make sure that you're present. You're in the office, you're working, right? So companies need to be kind of aware of what is their time and attendance policy and what is their delivery on the work versus their presence in the office.
Yeah, I feel like I used to work at a foreign company, and they were very focused on productivity. And to track productivity, they track time.
It's totally true. It's very, very true. And so when companies hire, they need to kind of be very transparent with what does a daily work look like? How much are they clocking in on time? And how much are they being assessed on the delivery of work?
Let's shift to discussing some of the deal breakers you've observed. So how transparent are candidates about these priorities during the interviews?
Yeah, I would say not very transparent. I think particularly in a traditional interview that might be held in Japanese, it's going to be focused a lot more on the Q&A of assessments, and they're also prepared to talk more about their qualifications for the job. So the nature of interviews themselves generally don't lend themselves to talk about motivations as much as assessments. And so usually towards the tail end of an interview, the interviewer might ask about motivations, and they ask a very direct question like, what are your motivations? Generally, candidates are kind of glazed over by that, and they might give a very textbook answer, but they're not giving the answers that will really help you close the candidate or understand the true motivations.
They probably rehearsed that question multiple times, so they might not be saying what they really think inside.
Yeah, and probably wisely so. I think recruiters are also going to be preparing them to maybe not be completely transparent about their wish and their hopes. Some of those things may not be what the hiring manager wants to hear. So unless it's part of more of an integrated relationship building meeting rather than just a straight up interview, candidates aren't going to be disclosing that information, and recruiters are probably advising them as such. Hiring companies expect recruiters to kind of offer that information as well. So it's part of the initial relationship building and meeting we do to uncover maybe the first layer of what a candidate's motivations might be. And as we get to know them, we can learn more about their motivations through the process. And we'll be, in turn, communicating that to the different hiring companies. But it shouldn't stop there. It should really be more of a process of learning from each step in the interview. So I would always recommend that talent acquisitions really takes control of the process and help structure the interview and hiring managers, stakeholders, so they're uncovering different layers of what the candidate motivations can be alongside the advice that the recruiter is offering to them. One way that hiring companies can do that is by asking both indirect and direct questions throughout the process. And maybe they're part assessment questions, but they're also meant to discover the candidate's motivations. So those would be some ideas that I'm often advising clients to take a look at in their interview process.
What questions should the hiring managers ask in these cases?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, it's fine to ask questions that are based on you're assessing the candidate. We're always assessing the candidate. The candidate's always assessing the hiring manager in the company. But I would challenge them to ask a little bit more creative questions. I have a few I could suggest, but I would say maybe each hiring manager probably can come up with their own too that matches the job. Some of the general questions I like to ask to candidates are, what did you find most challenging about your current job? Another one might be, what's your typical day of work? Take me through your typical day of work. Particularly when you're on video or hopefully face-to-face, we can really learn kind of more about what the candidate enjoys throughout the day of work and what they may not enjoy so much. Then we can dive deeper into why that might be. Another one would be, how are your company values and how are they lived out? Many companies know that values sometimes are something they talk about, but they're not really lived out. So being able to ask questions about your current and past company's values and what does that look like in your day-to-day work. Another one that I particularly find is a good indication of candidates' personalities and motivations would be to give them the scenario of, if there was one change in your company that you could make to impact the business, what change would that be? Allow them to be the shacho for a day. What this does is it asks them to be creative, but also to think about the commercial goals of the business. It can also challenge them to see how negative or proactive they are about the business situation versus just complaining about something that might only affect them. So that's one question I would suggest that people maybe incorporate into their interview questions. The final one, and this is one I often ask, particularly executives, is who was your best manager and why? And by asking that, I'm learning quite a bit. I'm learning, one, who the great executives in the industry are. And many of us, we know these professionals, and so we can kind of align, if the candidate likes this person, then this is the way they're best managed. So that's a great question to ask, both to learn about the market and to learn about how the candidate finds themselves aligned in different styles of management. I think that plays into another point, which I think the recruitment process needs to be integrated into more seamless pre-onboarding, onboarding, and retention. In fact, about 2 years ago, Apex did a study with 5 HR directors as we identified that onboarding and retention was a real challenge for companies. So one of the biggest takeaways was there needed to be a better recruitment assessment to pre-onboarding to help the candidate join and have a pathway of success. And so I think using some of the interview questions that you learned from the candidate and incorporating that into their onboarding and retention is a really good idea.
Moving on, there are many talent acquisition people wondering if a company is limited in what they can offer salary-wise, what could they do?
Yeah, we understand that companies have salary bandwidths and often they have to live by those. And recruiters should help you communicate that, but also understand the market, and maybe you do need to make some compromises on the talent you can expect to onboard for certain salary ranges. I think it's important to start with kind of that understanding and that empathy, that miracles will not often happen. If you don't have the salary budget, you're probably not going to get the caliber of candidate who's beyond that salary. And to be communicating that very honestly with global stakeholders or local stakeholders, and using data to do that. So we're often working with clients to offer the market data to show them where there might be a little bit of a misalignment in salary and compensation plans. It's not only the overall salary, but it might be the structure of the base and the bonus and RSUs. So that type of data is one that our clients are finding more and more valuable as the global policies on salary bandwidths are quite strong. I think there's other creative ideas as well. One would be to hire somebody maybe who might be a step below the position, who can develop their skills into that role. Companies don't tend to be as keen on doing that. They really are looking for a one-to-one fit. And while I recognize that would be ideal, if they find themselves in a situation where their salary bands just can't onboard the right talent, then definitely looking at more high potential talent for a step down would be one solution. we see this happening a lot more in the U.S., and these ideas are actually coming from more hiring managers and stakeholders in the U.S. It could be because of the market size of the U.S., but companies do tend to hire more for potential and maybe more junior level talent to step into the role. But they need to then assess that candidate quite differently. I think we need to look at this in Japan, particularly because we have a changing work demographic, an aging population, and just a different workforce than we did 20 years ago. So it's a real good time for Japan to consider how to upskill talent and maybe not just hire a one-to-one fit.
Is there anything else you can share about creating a smooth interview process?
Yeah, recently a very good client of ours shared with us kind of one of their largest expectations for recruiters beyond just delivering the right talent, and that was no surprises. And I think we can all agree that surprises in the recruitment process are never a good thing. So I think this is where the hiring company and the agencies really need to work together closely to understand the story of the position, understand why the position is open, understand all the details beyond the job description, so we're able to communicate that effectively to the candidates. Vice versa, we need to understand deeply about the candidate as much as possible beyond their resume, so we could explain all the motivations we can to the client when we introduce them, but also ongoing through the process. So I think that no surprises is definitely a big one. With the human element, we also have to leave room that there's always going to be some changes, right? Changes can be surprises. So both sides need to be quite adaptable to that, and understanding what somebody said one day might change 3 weeks later. It'll most certainly change 6 weeks later, and we can expect it to change quite a bit in 2 months. And so that leads me to my next one, which would be time kills deals, or speed wins. And this isn't only exclusive to recruitment. I'm sure most salespeople will also kind of know this type of term in their sales cycle. But time really does kill the deal in the recruitment process. So whether it is, you've lengthened your recruitment process to 3 to 6 interviews, or you're just not getting the feedback in a timely manner, time will kill the deal initially. And speed wins. So speed isn't only on the execution of the recruitment itself, but it's also on the information provided. So recruiters should be the most impatient group of trying to get information as soon as possible. And often we do have to wait for different parties, but nobody should have to wait on the recruiter.
I feel like that's very true in Apex. Every recruiter in our company is following up with candidates, following up with the talent acquisition or hiring manager all the time. So they're really speedy.
Yep. I think I'm often accused of being impatient, but I hope that actually helps in the recruitment process. Maybe not always the easiest to work with, but an impatient recruiter is somebody who's always thinking about what's next and how to get the information. The next thing I would suggest to clients is really think about, particularly for hard to fill positions, how you can make your talent acquisitions lead the project manager of that recruitment process. Have them be the owner. Give them the accountability, but also empower them with everything they need to manage the time, to manage everything they need to. Too often, the talent acquisitions is seen as delivering or managing the recruitment company and delivering the candidates to the hiring manager. But I think talent acquisition should be empowered to be more project managers, to be able to keep everybody at task. The time at task, the deliverables on things like assessment points, motivation points, so everything can get closed a lot quicker. Yeah. Many companies have moved to an ATS, or applicant tracking system, to ensure more visibility. But I've seen the opposite, actually. I think it's probably safe to say that Japan has not yet been wowed by an ATS system. I'm sure they're out there, but nothing has worked in terms of speeding up the process, allowing to get all the information, managing stakeholders. So I would say talent acquisitions being a project lead, managing the technologies, but not depending on them to deliver results, is another good idea for companies to consider.
So could you share some of anonymous example where a company adjusted according to your feedback?
Yeah. I've had the pleasure to work with some really amazing tech companies, and tech companies tend to be quite progressive in their recruitment strategies, and quite often they're scheduling weekly or bi-weekly meetings with me. And I think this is wonderful, even if it's just 5 or 10-minute check-ins to talk about the search and the candidate market and who we've introduced. It drives the deliverable on both sides. It puts their search top of mind to me. And I also know that I'm being treated as their partner because they're allocating the time each week to speak with me. It motivates me to work with my team to deliver the results. It also allows us the time to talk about the candidate or the market insights and an overall market situation. It empowers and gives them more information to share with different stakeholders on why the search might be challenging and what the pitfalls might be. So it also benefits all the candidates in the process because they should be getting more timely feedback and better preparation for each step. So that's something where I've seen companies implementing, and I would suggest more and more companies schedule those times to be checking up with recruiters. And also, if companies aren't doing that, I would suggest recruiters ask that their hiring companies spend more time with them to check in on searches. Another example was a local talent acquisitions staff was having a hard time finding candidates for their job because the qualifications and the expectations for the hiring team were very severe. And they didn't feel like it was their place to push back. They had tried several times, but the mandate from Global was still quite clear. So by discussing very closely, we were able to offer kind of true market insights into the bottlenecks and challenges and what competitors were doing and the competitors' assessments and their interview process. And at that time, the talent acquisitions trusted me as a partner, so they got me on the phone with Global. I was able to kind of advise Global from my perspective, and we were able to make some changes in the job requirements and the interview process as well. So that was a case of really working as a partner with the talent acquisition staff, understanding what I could offer, where there was a bottleneck in their process, and in the end, it turned out to be a great result.
Wow. You actually went into the meeting with the global stakeholders.
Yeah, I think this is one where we're seeing a lot more of because if you're establishing yourself as a partner with your client, they shouldn't be holding back the relationships with some of the stakeholders. They should be encouraging that because kind of the more hands on deck in order to fill the role, the better.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your predictions on how recruitment in Japan will evolve in next 5 years.
Yeah, it probably comes as no surprise to mention technology. It's always been a big part of any business evolution, and recruitment is not immune to that. With technology, we've seen a lot of tools that help us do our job, but despite many people claiming it has not replaced our jobs yet. Apex is very good at embracing technologies and building it into our workflows to help us work faster, smarter, but by maintaining relationships. So we have a really amazing tech team that helps enable us to be able to access the information that we put in our database to be able to get results. So I think utilizing technology is really key, but you can't lose that human element alongside the technology to help you build relationships. So what I often say is, I have a good ability to memorize names, and I've met so many people in the market, but maybe I can only memorize 500 names, probably 300 names, maybe 200 as I get older. With a database, I can now access 20,000, 50,000 names. These are people who I've probably met, but I'm able to access their names. And then once I can get into the profile, I realize, I have a relationship with this person. So it's not just data on a database, but the database is helping me bring up profiles that I actually know from face-to-face interactions maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's also important for companies to not have an allergy to new technologies. So learning about things like generative AI and not getting too carried away with what they can do, but keeping an eye on how you can utilize them into your existing process. My final prediction, and maybe predictable coming from an old industry vet like myself, I believe that relationships will matter even more because we have to compete with the transactional nature of technology. So relationships will be even more key, and that'll set you apart. they're not going to be easy to develop because information is now a commodity. Access to candidate information, access to recruiters, breaking in for client relationships is more challenging than it's ever been. But that's why it's even more important for us to desire those meaningful relationships. And once we have them, to really deliver, as I mentioned before, on their work. How can we help them do their job beyond just sending a CV, beyond just sending a job description? So I think the relationships will continue to matter quite a bit. I'm tempted to say that people will still want to work with people. But I also know that that's not always the case. Sometimes people prefer that digital presence, right? People don't love phone calls anymore. They want an email, or they want a portal where they can make a decision. But ultimately, I think people still want to work with people. So it's just up to those people to be able to offer more value, more experience, more of that human interaction that technology can't do.
Thank you for tuning in to our first episode of Reach New Heights. Thanks, Curtis, for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Misa Koizumi, and we'll see you next time.